What's up? So I know it's been a little bit. I have been focusing on a couple different things, but I wanted to go ahead and start part 2 of Maya 101 because in the end that's kind of the new series that I'm going to really focus on top of the daily vlogging with my workouts and everything like that. Trying to make sure that I'm bringing in as much content as possible, as much helpful content as possible, and I'm really excited to go where I'm going with this Maya series. So with that said, let's just jump right on into it. We're going to go over object creation, moving around in the viewport, and object movement. So let's jump on in. Okay everybody, and here we are inside of Maya. So one of the main things that Maya is very good at is modeling, whether it's polygonal modeling, surface modeling, or modeling off of your own curves. Maya is an extremely powerful modeling tool, and one way to start modeling is to start creating basic shapes, basic curves, whatever you want to do. In this tutorial, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this off kind of the way I initially learned how to move around in 3D space, which is we're going to create a few separate objects. So I'm up here in the polygons menu. Again, you have the surfaces and the polygons. If you missed the first video, please make sure you go back and check that out. There's a lot of good information in there on where all these menus are located and what some of them do. But we're going to start off with the basics. We're going to create one cube. Now, when creating an object, you can do this one of two ways. You can drag and drop like I just did, which I'm going to turn on my shader real quick. Or you can double click and it creates a kind of Maya's default perfectly shaped one that you can scale and work with if you want to. Alright, so we've got a cube. We're going to use our W key. Now W is one of the hotkeys for the movement tools in Maya. W allows you to bring up the movement, the translation movement tool, and we're just going to pull the box over here. Next we're going to create is a cylinder. I'm just going to click once and then double click on the viewport and it brings up my cylinder. Notice it brought up the same transforming tool I had before. That's because it was the last tool I used. If I press the R key on the keyboard, which is the shortcut for scale, just to scale it up a little bit. Actually, I'm going to go back a little bit. I'm going to move him to the side too. This may seem very basic, but this is kind of one of the first ways you're going to learn how to work in Maya and move around the viewport. Next, we're going to create a sphere. And the sphere is going to form the top of what we are eventually going to create, which I'm going to just scale it and move it out of the way. And keep in mind, when you see the tool chains like that, I am hitting one of those shortcut keys just to move it. It's the way I'm used to working. If you need to, those buttons are right here off to the side. And then last but not least, we're going to create a pyramid. And bring that guy up and scale him up. And I'm also going to increase the point to this guy a little bit, just because I want it a little bit more pointy. Alright, so we have our objects created. If you look back at the first video, look back at the first lesson, I kind of told you guys how to rotate and work around in the viewport. So one of the things we're going to do is just practice going through rotations. The way you rotate in the perspective viewport is by holding Alt and then clicking, and you're left clicking and dragging. This will allow you to pan and tilt and do all sorts of other movements that you may need to get a better view on what you're working with within the perspective viewport. Now, if you want to just say slide or zoom, zooming is going to be with the scroll wheel. And again, if you have a mouse that doesn't have a scroll wheel that actually does the scrolling, if it only has the ability to change the way that the mouse scrolls, you're going to have a hard time with this next one, which is the panning feature, where you hold Alt and you push down the center button on your mouse. And that's an important one, because if you're working on a longer model, you'll need to pan across to work on it and move around. But overall, just start playing with movement in the viewport and combining these. The other movement you can do is by holding the Alt key. You can right click and do kind of a smooth zoom in the viewport. I don't use that one all that much just because I'm so used to using the scroll wheel. I also use a 3D mouse, so things are a little bit different for me sometimes. So really this first exercise is going to be pretty simple. We're going to build a tower out of these blocks. How I originally learned it was a pre-opened file that you open up and you can just kind of work with things and move them around. So I'm going to show you guys just kind of how you would want to work with this if you were doing something. So this kind of follows that old childhood block toy type thing that you'd work with when you were younger. We're just going to change the colors on there, and all I did there was I right-clicked on the object, hit Material Attributes, and then we're just going to click on this color area, make that red, and you see how that makes everything red. So the problem here is you want some variety. So if we want to change it up, we're going to have to assign a new material. So what we'll do is we'll go right underneath Material Attributes, assign a new material, assign a Lambert just like the original material, and we're going to change that Lambert to a blue. Now it's important to track what you're doing when you're creating materials, because sometimes you can create so many and they'll kind of get out of hand. So I'll name this Cylinder. And we're going to do the same thing for the ball or sphere. Lambert. Go with green. And the same for the pyramid. A lot of the times I'll just give things short names because I usually know what they pertain to, what they belong to. But this just gives you a way that you can easily track your shapes and look at them. And I thought about uploading these files, but really my idea behind this is to teach you every step of the way, so I don't want to give you a file and be like, here, do this. So we're going to go ahead and scale this guy down, and you're going to start playing with moving objects in your viewport. And you'll notice it's not very real world, so if you drag an object, you can drag it through another object. But we're going to do this as seamlessly as possible there. So what I did was I just placed that cylinder on top of that square. I'm going to do the same thing with the ball. And if you're joining in and this seems pretty basic to you, that's fine. If it's something that you're already comfortable with, go ahead and wait for the next video. But people who are starting out with this are going to want to learn every step of the way. And we're going to align that. So there we go, we have a little tower. Now, one thing I like to do is to make sure all of my objects are straight. So if you're looking at this straight on, you can tell that this guy is clearly not centered. But it's kind of hard to center in the perspective port because you'll move something and then it'll go another way. It just gets messy. So we're going to hit the space key. Space key brings up every view you need, and then I'm just going to line everything up with this grid point right here. And all I'm doing is lining up the center point of the object with the center point on this grid. And so you're going to run into an issue here where some objects don't have a center point. And that's really an easy fix. In fact, when you get into more advanced modeling, this is what you're going to run into. You're going to have to add more faces to an object. So with the channel box opening, with your channel box, which if you're missing your channel box, just open it here. You'll scroll down and you'll hit this inputs button if it's not already expanded. And you'll see that you have subdivision options. You're going to hit these subdivisions, and right now we're just going to hit 2. 2 just adds new center framework, so it does give that object more of a center. And when you're working with like points and point modeling, it'll make it a lot easier to control and model, and you'll need to do it anyway if you want to create more advanced objects. Alright, cool. So there's our tower. Perfectly centered, which I'm sure it's not, but that's okay. You can scroll around it, play with the view, pan with it. Just learn your way around the viewport. If you're just starting off, this can be a very awkward experience because you're not used to working in 3D space, but that's okay. So we're gonna drag and select all of that, move that guy forward, and again, I'm gonna line him up as best I can just with the grid, because that's how I do things. So we have our one tower, but say you want to create another tower. Say we're trying to build a castle. One issue you're going to run into is how do you make more of the same object? Well, in Maya it's super simple. By hitting Control and D, you create a duplicate object. You can then drag that duplicate object over, do whatever you want to with it. And the beauty of that is you can select as many as you want to. Pull this guy back a bit, and boom, you've got 4 view towers. I don't like the way that's looking, so I'm just going to shore them in a little bit. And there we have it. So, super basic, but super important to learn. So let's look at this and let's start adding some new details to it that weren't in there necessarily, or some new objects that we haven't created yet. So one thing I want you to do is you're going to click and drag this new object. And you'll notice it'll come out red because I changed the default color in the viewport to red. That's okay, we can change it later if you want to. I'm just going to leave it that way because it matches the base. So what I did was I just dragged out a square, but I dragged it out in a way that makes it look like a panel or a wall. And then I'm going to just drag this guy in here and center him up. And then I'm going to scale it down just a little bit so it matches there. And there we have a wall. Control D to duplicate. I'm going to move that guy over. And Control D to duplicate again. And this guy, we're going to actually play with the rotate tool. When you're using a rotate tool, you've got your axis, all your different axes right here. So you can also drag in the center and drag it however you want to, but that's dangerous and don't do that unless you absolutely have to. So I'm just going to grab it here along the Y-axis and rotate it about 90 degrees. And if you want it perfect, you can always click up here in the channel box, type in -90, enter, and there you go. I'm going to move that guy to the back. So we're starting to have what looks like a castle. It looks like a kid's toy castle, but we left these too far out. So we're gonna hit the R key, and that's gonna bring us up our scale controller. And we're just gonna grab this guy and scale him in the X direction, so it meets up with the wall. And it creates a nice look there. So cool. So we've got this. We're good to go there. And now we're gonna do our front. Same thing, Control D, pull it to the front, and boom, there you go. So we have a nice little castle box thing, but there's no way to get into said castle. So, same thing, we're going to expand this little menu up here. So, for whatever reason, the inputs option on this is broken. I don't have it anymore, which is very odd because everything else has it, but that's okay. I'm going to show you a different way of doing this. So what I'm going to do is click on this show button up here in your viewport, go to isolate select and view selected. That's going to bring you up the only object that you're working with. And you may notice that rotating around that single object is kind of wonky, so it's making you rotate the entire plane. If you hit F, it's going to focus the camera, and then you can actually rotate around just a single object. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go up here to the edit mesh button, scroll all the way down here to the insert edge loop button. And you'll notice it says click to drag on the edges. So you're going to click on the edge of one of these and then just drag it to where you want it to, which we're going to drag it right in the center point there. And then you can now select that center point and drag a new one, and that's also going to split the box. So by splitting the box like this, it gives you a little bit more control to build however many faces you need. So what I'm going to do is go back up to edit mesh and do offset edge loop tool. That's going to allow me to click the center button, and whichever direction you click in is how this is going to split. So if I click on this guy, it's going to split this way, and if I click on this guy, it's going to split this way. So we are going to split it out to about right there. I'm going to do one more right about there. And now we have this nice basic object. What's cool about this is when you right click on this object and you hit vertex, you can also work with the lines if you want to. You'll notice that these little purple dots show up, and you can actually select all these little dots, and this is going to bring us kind of more into the polygonal modeling arena, where I'm going to grab these dots and pull them up a little bit, and then I'm going to control click these other ones to deselect them and pull that up and make a little bit more of a curvature. And what's cool is if you, same thing, if you right click, hit edge, you can actually double click and select an entire loop. Double click, and then we're going to use the scale button, the scale key, to scale that guy in. And there we have an entrance for the castle. Now you can go whichever way you want to with this, but there's a bunch of ways to practice. There's a bunch of ways to learn how to do this, but I'm giving you the basic tools right now so you can start diving into this and building your own objects. One thing you can do if you wish is if you do the insert edge loop. And by the way, if you want to exit those tools, the insert edge loop tool, to exit those tools, hit Q. Q will automatically exit the tool and take you back to whatever your last selection tool was. So you notice if you grab this guy, even though you created these two lines, it's still part of the object, so it's still going to pull whatever it's connected to. But there's a unique tool up here called the extrusion tool, or extrude. If you hit extrude, you get a new kind of controller that allows you to control every single direction, every single scale attribute, and every single rotation attribute. But if we just simply pull up on this guy, it's going to create a nice little, I guess you call those sentries. I'm not sure what they're called on castles, but you get a nice little sentry right there. And you can build those all over if you'd like to. I'm gonna go ahead and just get rid of that guy because it's not really part of this tutorial, but I'm leaving it open for you to do what you wish. So there you have it, guys. That's it for that one. Very basic, but I wanted to give you a rundown on how to move around in a viewport, how to create objects, and how to kind of change their color and do a couple extra special things. I'm still working on trying to figure out where I want to go with all of this, whether I want to start doing like a tutorial series based off of a single object creation all the way through the end, or if I want to continue with basics. So the next video will be kind of up in the air, kind of a surprise. So if you are seeing this and you want to, leave a comment, let me know what you want to see. If not, be sure to leave a like and please subscribe if you're new. Other than that, I think that's it for today. Keep an eye out for the daily vlogs and then keep an eye out for the next tutorial, and I will see you guys on the next one.